them just dedicating themselves to go kind of be the support structure of a tour, and they never get any thanks for that. So let's just give it up for our amazing tech team these last couple weeks. They've been incredible. They really have. So the Farnsworth brothers, I'll tell you, they're great. They're great Americans. So my goodness, there's a lot I want to go into tonight, and a lot of it actually is Alabama centric, which is going to be a lot of fun. Let's just talk about the last 24 hours. I'm gonna talk about this not even in political terms, because I just think that's a little bit sloppy and boring. You guys could watch that other places. I want to go a step further and deeper. Some of you may or may not have saw the news last night, but all of a sudden all the smart people on television are super confused why all of a sudden Americans are so angry about forced vaccinations, mask mandates, and kind of this what we call on our show the Great Wokelash, right? Which is this backlash against the institutional wokism that has been kind of pervading American society over the last the last 18 months, and especially the last year. And what we saw from all across the country, from Virginia to Seattle, we're going to go through all of it tonight. And again, not in political terms, but just looking at it from a very factual standpoint of trying to analyze what's happening. People are more disgusted than ever than the people that are ruling them. And there has never been a greater disconnect between the people that run the country and the people that make the country run, right? So I kind of want to make that distinction. Those are two totally different things. And so there's this kind of common sense argument that a lot of people say, which is like, well, that goes against common sense. You hear that all the time, right? Well, what does that actually mean? Well, that means is that using practical judgment or prudence, in the Greek word prudentia, it would just say like, that wouldn't work in the job that I am doing. So let's just pick any profession. How about a truck driver, right? Which is the hero that I want to talk about tonight, which I think is going to be a lot of fun to share, which is if you're a truck driver and you do one thing and you say one thing and you do another, you'll be fired from your job. If you don't show up on time or you act in huge hypocrisy, you'll be fired from your job. This is someone that would kind of be part of what I would call the muscular class in America. So there's two types of economic classes in America. And by the way, one is not necessarily better than the other, right? There's the muscular class, and then there's the Zoom and Skype class, right? So I'm part of the Zoom and Skype class, okay? That doesn't make me a better person. It just so happens I was able to keep on doing my work in the midst of the lockdown without having to lift boxes or wear a mask all day long. But the people that actually run the country, which I think never got the credit they deserved, quite honestly, during the pandemic, are the people that worked at the Amazon fulfillment centers, the people that are our police officers, the people that are our firefighters, the people that actually drove trucks. And instead, you saw this growing disconnect of the people in charge have this arrogance and this attitude, almost this top-down revolution, like, oh, you work with your hands, you don't have a doctorate from Harvard, you're dumb and you're stupid, right? And so, but we saw this bubbling up in a variety of different ways. And for those of us that look at this stuff really closely and are worried about these trends, we said, this is not sustainable. You can't declare war on the people that actually make your country run and act as if there won't be a backlash against that, right? It's like, just keep on serving me food, serfs and servants. And we'd always make jokes about it. When Nancy Pelosi would be out in Napa Valley, and all of her donor friends were maskless, right? And every single person serving food outdoors were wearing masks, right? And we saw that with Obama's birthday party in Martha's Vineyard, where, we had to kind of watch all the videos of people that had to wear masks. They were maskless, but they were a sophisticated, vaccinated crowd. And we saw that some people call it double standards or hypocrisy. It's not. It's hierarchy. It's people in charge that think they're actually better than you. Right? So hypocrisy is like if you actually believe the rule or you say it and you do something else. These are people that actually think they're at a different level of existence. So the thing I want to start with tonight, though, and kind of really focus on is what happened in the last 24 hours. And some of you might say, oh, Charlie, you're going to talk about the Virginia governor's race. You're going to talk about how in Seattle they just elected a pro-police conservative Republican as head of their city attorney in Seattle. Like, wow, that's shocking. No, actually, I want to introduce all of you and our audience watching at home, thanks to our wonderful tech team, to one of the most unbelievable stories in the history of American politics. And whether you're a liberal here tonight, and by the way, thank you for coming if you are on the left. I mean that non-sarcastically. It says a lot to actually go hear about someone you might disagree with or hear those ideas, because who knows what you're hearing on college campuses. Alabama's great, right? No liberals at Alabama, right? It's just terrific. Yeah, see? There you go. But no, this when I saw this story, did anyone watch the live stream last night that I was doing? I don't think I've laughed that hard my entire life. when I just saw this. I was flipping through social media, and I couldn't control myself when I saw this story of this truck driver from southern New Jersey who spent $153 total dollars on his campaign. $153. And as of right now, the election's about to be called and certified. He's about to beat the second most powerful person in New Jersey, the head of the Senate presidency in New Jersey, by 2,000 votes, right? And so, and by the way, this is not even about like Republican or Democrat. It's not about any of that, right? It's about, wait a second, time out. Like, what? And so I did some digging into this, right? I was like, okay, who is this guy, right? Like, is he a son of Jeff Bezos, or like, you know, is he part of the Rockefeller family, or was he born with some sort of birthright? And so you look at this guy, and his name is Edwin Durr, right? And yeah, you could laugh at the name, whatever, but you look into it, it's like if you were to have central casting of like what the normal American was. Now, some of you guys might not remember the 2016 or 2012 presidential debates of that guy that wore that like red sweater. Do you remember that? Ken Bone, right? Thank you. You guys remember that? Maybe not. It's before your time. It's like, I just want to give that guy a hug, right? It's like, it's just, there's not, he just wants what's right for the world. There's so few people like that anymore, it seems, in public life. And so this guy, Edwin Durr, decides to do the ultimate David and Goliath type exercise. Now, I don't know how, I'm going to do my best to describe this to you. The guy he was running against is the head of the Senate of New Jersey, okay? It's untouchable. An example would be like if a random candidate decided to run up against Chuck Schumer, okay? Or a random candidate would just be like, I'm going to run against Nancy Pelosi. This guy runs the state of New Jersey. Now, to give you an idea, he's been in elected office since 2004. Some of you were born in 2004, okay? I know that because I actually just talked to someone that was literally born in 2006, not even born. And so this guy has run the state of New Jersey. He runs the entire political apparatus and machine. And so when you start to look into it, you're like, all right, how did this guy make it happen? So you look at his campaign receipts. You're like, did he get a big contribution from the pharmaceutical companies? Spent $153, $85 of which was spent at Dunkin' Donuts. And the remaining $70 was spent on flyers and materials. And so they said, what was your grand strategy? He's like, I just kind of showed up and asked people for their vote. And so he was conducting an interview last night. The first thing he said is like, I have no idea what's going on, right? It's the first thing he says, like, but I did stay at a Holiday Inn Express last night. But no, I'm kidding. But all of a sudden, you read deeper into this, and this is an important thing, is he ran because he was so disgusted and he was so upset that he, as a truck driver, continually kept this economy opening and keep going, and he just felt continually insulted by the people in charge. And so Edwin Durr, who didn't go to Harvard, who's a father of 3, a grandfather of 6, rides a Harley as an Eagles fan and is a truck driver. Again, like central casting, right? Like if you were to design like the middle class, like Joe the plumber candidate, it's that guy. It looks like he's going to displace the Senate president in New Jersey. He's winning by 2,000 votes. And so regardless of your political affiliation here tonight or whatever you view of it, there's got to be something where all of a sudden we take a time out, right? Well, wait a second, that's not normal. And it's not even about conservative or liberal, right? It's about people in charge versus people that are getting suppressed and people that are being crushed by the regime. And it's this simple. It's citizens versus subjects. When you are all of a sudden having a campaign where you don't campaign, okay? Dunkin' Donuts and $75 for flyers, that's not campaigning, okay? In that district, to give you an idea of how competitive it was 8 years ago, it was a $17 million race. Now it's a $153 race, okay? Goes from $17 million to $153. What that should just send a massive message to every American out there is that the people, the voters themselves, are willing to pull the five fire alarm fire and go through and say, I don't know who you are, but I'm sick of you saying that you have to mask my children while you get to go walk to whatever restaurant you want and have to wear a mask. I'm sick of seeing my relatives that are police officers have to walk off the force because they don't want to take a vaccine for a virus they've already had 2 times. I'm sick and tired of seeing my church get locked down while the liquor store remains open in southern New Jersey. I'm sick and tired of seeing that every time I turn on television, Fauci's telling me that I'm a bad person because I don't want to take some sort of experimental vaccine. And all of a sudden you saw this pressure cooker, right? And thank goodness for the founding fathers and the framers for giving us this type of system, right? Where the ultimate check and balance on power, the ultimate way that we're actually able to hold people in charge is by showing up at elections. And so this guy, Edwin, has been doing some interviews. They said, well, what's your agenda? And he said, look, my agenda is very simple, right? I just want people like me to have a voice. And again, this is not like a new thing in politics, right? But it's never been so bad. It's never been so bad and so exaggerated. And what showed me last night is that the very same type of behavior that people engaged in 2016 when Donald Trump got elected has not stopped, which is this. Voters are trying to get their leaders' attention. They are willing to go vote for the truck driver over the Senate president. You're like, will you please start listening to us and start representing us? And that's regardless of political affiliation. And again, it goes to this divide of the people that run the country and the people that make the country run. And so if you're able to do that, because a couple different things I want to just focus on with the Edwin Durr story. Number one, if anyone here or watching online is in a heavy liberal area and you're like, oh, there's nothing I could do about it, like, no, that's not true. If you can win and displace the second most powerful person in New Jersey with $153, half of which being spent on Dunkin' Donuts, which is an unbelievably suspicious amount of money being spent at Dunkin' Donuts, by the way, like $83, like what are you buying, right? Then every single person in this room and watching online, you can make a difference. Like you can turn your community, you could turn your campus in a direction that other people would never have expected. But the other thing that I think is so incredibly important is that he decided to do something about it. And this is another thing, is that he didn't just want to sit idly by and be a spectator and kind of just be a participant, right? He's like, no, I got to get in the arena myself. And that is one of the things that makes America so different and so unique, is that we have a participatory system that allows us to actually engage yourself. For example, you don't like something, go fix it yourself. And what's so amazing is he was telling the stories like, yeah, all my family and friends were laughing at me. They were mocking me. They were ridiculing me, being like, you're never going to win. And he's like, the last couple weeks of the campaign, all I did was I called my mom and she just said, I'm praying for you every morning and you're going to win. And it's like this story where it's like, wow, that's a glitch in the actual political matrix of the country. And I think this is only growing, by the way. I think that what we saw in the last week is a revival of the American citizen. And we're all of a sudden to see the kind of rejection of there's nothing I can do, I just have to sit idly by, things are going to stay as they are, and instead the exact opposite. And by the way, I want to say it's Edwin, not Edward, so my deepest apology to Mr. Durr. But it's Edwin, not Edward. I want to move on to this other one that I think is super interesting and important, which is this question of what is the ruling class? Because you're going to hear me kind of talk about this a lot, which is we have a group of people in our country that have been not elected, that have been unaccountable for far too long. The best example of this is someone, if you're a young person, he has impacted your life significantly, that never should have had as much power as he had, Fauci. Fauci should be in prison, not the head of NIH, first of all, for everything he's done against our country. But this is someone that is in an extra constitutional position in our country. This is someone that people did not go vote for. This is someone who is largely unaccountable. He was unknown, and he has unchecked and unlimited power. To be able to say that we need to go force vaccines on people against their will. Now, let me just talk about the vaccine for a second. I don't care if you got vaccinated. Do they force it at University of Alabama, or do they just strongly recommend it? Strongly recommend it? Yeah. Well, that's better than most schools. Employees were forced. Medical exemptions allowed, and religious. There's a couple. Okay, that's good. So I want to just say you guys have a much better situation than most schools. Some schools, they're kicking students out of schools across the country. So you guys should be very thankful that in Alabama, that if that's your medical decision you want to make, then so be it, right? But again, I'm not going to talk, if you guys want to talk about the vaccine, that's fine. I don't care. I'm not getting the vaccine, and I'm going to fight to the death to make sure that no one's going to force to get the vaccine against their will. And so simple medical choice issue, right? Especially if you've already had the virus before, naturally immunized. But I think beyond that, how Fauci and the corrupt interests around him have been so effective at suppressing any sort of conversation around azithromycin, ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, monoclonal antibodies, and aspirin. And it might not be for you, right? These things might not be things that you might be interested in, or, you know, I don't want to hear about it. Fine. The fact you're not even allowed to talk about it online, the fact that there is this top-down censorship campaign is really creepy. And we're talking about something that has now shown to help certain people that have been diagnosed with this. So you think to yourself, wait a second, we locked down our country for nearly a year. We canceled school altogether at most parts of the country. We shut down the church. We forced masks on people, and which is dehumanizing in nature, by the way. And I believe that masking children is child abuse, pure and simple. I think when you try to put a four-year-old with a mask for a virus they're not at a significant risk of dying from, I think it's total, complete child abuse, and it stunts their development altogether. And by the way, just so you know, that if a child were to ride in the car to this event, as there's a couple here tonight, they're at far greater risk in the car ride over to this event than from catching and dying from the Fauci virus, right? Far greater, like 20 times higher risk. But no, that would be way too prudent and way too common sense to talk about. Instead, at a deeper and more fundamental level, most of these decisions from the public health side of it were made without your consent. And it's a violation of the consent of the governed. And so that kind of goes back to what I just talked about with Mr. Durr in New Jersey, is that people feel like, what else am I supposed to do to get your attention? Because you've been using government force, you've been using force to micromanage my life for the last year and a half, and I'm not going to put up with it anymore. And I just want to say that young people in particular, and this is why I'm so excited about Turning Point USA, is that if you want to, this is it's kind of shocking about kind of the people on the left, like, yeah, we're the rebels, like, yeah, right, sure. It's like, if there's any demographic that should be pushing against lockdowns and vaccine mandates, it should be high school and college kids. I mean, in some ways, it's just so funny to see the people that are like protesting for systemic change in our country. And then all of a sudden they're like, you better get the vaccine and listen to everything that you are told, or else you're a terrible person. I'm like, where's the fighting spirit now when they want to go put a jab in your arm for something that has questionable outputs at best? And it really kind of does go to this question that I think that's really important, is who's in charge, which is who's actually in charge of our country. And it should be you. It should be the citizens, right? Citizen comes from a Greek word which means co-ruler or equal say in the government. And the government should be a project of, by, and for the people. And again, I'm not saying that there isn't a place for rulers, obviously. I'm not saying that we should get rid of all the rulers. That would be something that someone on the radical left would say. I said we need better rulers. We need rulers more like Ron DeSantis and less like Anthony Fauci. And so there's this dilemma that I think is in front of us right now that I think is really important. And the dilemma, I think last night actually kind of explained it really well, is what do we do about the things we're not allowed to talk about? And that's one of the things I want to talk about. Like, what do you do about the things that are thought crimes, right? And this is what's so great about elections, is that you're able to do it in privately, or else you're supposed to be able to do it in privately, right? This is why we named our entire tour what we did, which is Critical Racism Tour, or Critical Race Theory. And I don't need to dwell on this too much. I know a lot of you have seen plenty of videos on this from us. But pure and simple, we did this tour because diversity, equity, inclusion, Wokism, whatever you want to call it, seeping into every single portion of American life is threatening every single young person's future. And so what is it? So CRT, it's an academic theory that's not just an academic theory. It's now in every single form of American life, from academics to military to corporate. And I'll prove to just some examples in front of you, which it is a basis of trying to say we are going to judge, we are going to stereotype, we're going to organize people based on the color of their skin. And super simply put, it's saying that things you cannot change are more important than things you can change. Right? Saying that your skin color is super important. Let me boil it down even easier to you. 75 schools across the country have black-only dormitories. 75 schools across the country, where they say we are going to have dormitories for white people and dormitories for black people. Explain to me how that is not resegregation and Jim Crow 2.0. Well, it is. It's racism. You don't have to overcomplicate it. And anyone defends it is a racist. And so now we have the reemergence of American racism under this veiled cloak of wokeism. At Columbia University, they have black-only graduation ceremonies. I mean, I was always raised in a country, you were too, that if you judge people based on the color of their skin, you're a racist. Oh, I'm sorry, you're not allowed to walk in this graduation ceremony because you have a different melanin content color of your skin? Yes, that's ridiculous. You don't have to overthink it. I don't have to give an hour-and-a-half lecture on why that's wrong. It's racist and it's bigoted, but it's happening everywhere. I'll give you another example. Western Washington University, black-only dormitories. In Georgia, anyone from Georgia, the great state of Georgia, Atlanta, they are now putting in sixth grade courses. Go Braves. That's good. I saw that. I was so thrilled to see that. Not an Astros fan. Don't mean to offend anybody. It's funny. I get more people are offended by my sports takes, by the way, than my political takes. No, it's a real thing, by the way. It's very real. Georgia, Atlanta, sixth graders. Black sixth graders go to one classroom. Black, white sixth graders go to another classroom. Georgia public schools, Atlanta public schools, you can look it up yourself. Same thing in San Diego. You might say, well, Charlie, what could possibly be the reason? They say that black students are threatened by white students, and therefore they want to have black-only learning environments, black-only dormitories, black-only cultural centers. It's nonsense. In fact, you are teaching racism to a generation that, quite honestly, was on pace to be the least racist generation in American history. But now we're raising many racists. And we are overemphasizing on such a great degree something that I couldn't care less about. I don't care about the color of your skin. I care about your actions. I care about your character. I care about your soul and your spirit. Your skin color is irrelevant to me. That is a sloppy, lazy, and dare I say pernicious and evil way to judge people, regardless if you're judging people if they're white or if they're black or anywhere in between. I think that's CJ. How you doing, CJ? Good to see you. You're doing a great job. Roll Tide. CJ's a friend of mine. He does a great job. And you go here, right? Yeah, it's awesome. You should ask a question later. If you guys don't know CJ, you should. He does a great job. And big social media following, too. Very impressive. And you've been fighting against CRT, too, right? Big time. Nonstop, right? Yeah, it's phenomenal. CJ Pearson, he's great. You guys should all get to know him. This is a very serious problem. And so last night, though, was a chapter in America rejecting all these ideas. And that's that's how significant this is, right? Which is, okay, like, whatever, I might not agree with the right on abortion or guns. We can talk about all that tonight if you want. Might not agree with that. But all of a sudden, when you are telling my sixth grader that they're a bad person based on the color of their skin, that because they're a white person and the anti kind of white push, like that's enough. Like, I'm not going to put up with that. And you saw that all across the country. Now, this is not just bad hiring practices. It's not just dormitories. It's not just graduation ceremonies. It has also impacted policing policy. And first of all, police, they're modern day heroes. They get the worst rap of any major organization in the country. Generally, police officers do a phenomenal job, and they keep all of us safe in ways we don't even recognize or understand. And even the most anti-police activist, they'll be quick to go pick up the phone and dial 911 if there's someone coming through the window trying to kill them. That every one of those activists will be like, well, why aren't you guarding me at this time? And here's the thing. I could talk about police statistics and how convoluted they are and how upside down they are, and this big lie of where people say, oh, yeah, you can't walk the street as a black person in this country without getting shot. It's nonsense. There's no data to support it. But what you see is in cities like Austin, Texas, when all of a sudden you have a war on police, the murder rate is up 80%. 80%. In Minneapolis, crime was up 40%. But here's the amazing thing. What happened last night? 75% of voters in Minneapolis rejected the defunding of the Minneapolis police. 75% of Minneapolis voters. And Seattle, everybody, just elected a city attorney who is super law and order, wants to restore funding to the police. Do you guys remember last summer when the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone was created? Chaz, right? Like a new country. Yeah, most people, and it's true, it's like a new sovereign country in America, sure. Now we're seeing people push back against it. But the reason we're doing the tour as it is, as this being our last stop on the road outside of the one we're doing in Arizona, which is, it's very simple and very clear, which is that these bad ideas don't just, kind of make you a little bit confused. They're not just like, oh, that doesn't make any sense. Like, oh, that's racist. No, it's making America a much more dangerous place to live. is that then all of a sudden you allow these untruths and these lies to be implemented. All of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, who needs the police anymore? Then innocent people all of a sudden start to get harmed. And so that's the reason we named the tour what we did, and why we're kind of on this ambitious, I guess you could say, crisscrossing the country talking about it. So there's a couple more things I want to talk about, then I want to do some questions because that's the most fun, and I want to hear from you guys of kind of what's happening. A couple things. I really want to talk about fraternities and sororities because I know that's a big deal here in the South. Am I right? Is that a big deal here? Big? Someone boo? That's not right. Well, let me say two things. Number one, let me talk about the South. I was born and raised in Chicago, Illinois, and many of you know this. Anyone from Chicago? Yeah? One person. That's awesome. Oh, I'm sorry. Jeez. Wow. Okay. Say something next time. There you go. Yeah. So you guys might agree with this or disagree, but at least where I was raised, and it was always kind of not so subtle from teachers and from people in my community, there was this arrogance of being in the North that you're better than the South, right? And that there is kind of this, and people in the South have no idea that they're like, what? I never knew that. Like, sometimes it's kind of like a memo that people north of the Mason-Dixon line look down on the attitude, the accent, the history of the South. And this is best kind of manifested in Northerners, me being one, now living in Arizona, which is neither, I don't know what it is, Southwest, I guess, wanting to remove monuments. And I've always been so disgusted by the removal of monuments for a variety of different reasons. And people say, well, Charlie, what do you support slavery? I'm like, that's such a ridiculous argument, obviously. No, I support allowing certain areas to commemorate things that happen in the way they see fit. And maybe that's a statute to say we never want to have that Civil War happen again. Maybe that's a statute that says we're going to remember the sacrifice of our fellow countrymen and people that we knew and people that are, that we were related to. And we have it there for a reason. The removal of history actually creates radicalism. The removal of history creates more radical people. And sometimes history can anchor you. It could sober you. It could create discussions. But when you remove it altogether, that is an arrogance that I think is imposing in an imperialist mindset of people that do not live here, all of a sudden telling people in Alabama and Mississippi, we're better than you. You don't understand. We're richer than you. We're smarter than you. And you might not know it's that explicit. It is that explicit by a lot of people in the North. They won't say it. They won't say it out loud. They'll pretend it doesn't exist. They have contempt for people south of the Mason-Dixon line. And let me tell you why I think this is ultimately beyond disgusting. You know who serves in our wars disproportionately? 7 states comprise 44%. 7 states comprise 44% of the U.S. military. Alabama, Mississippi, Tennessee, Kentucky, Georgia, South Carolina, and in North Carolina. I think that's 7. Yeah, that's right near there. 7 states right in this part of the world. Whenever there's a war or conflict, this part of the country rises up a lot more than people from Manhattan to go defend their freedoms. And so, excuse me when all of a sudden I start to say, hold on a second, like, you're now going to come parachute in like random lawyer from San Francisco who's never done anything meaningful or heroic in your life to go tell the people of Birmingham or Huntsville or Tupelo or from, Jackson, Mississippi or Athens, Georgia. Like, no, you got to go take down the statue. Like, meanwhile, 1 in 5 homes in some of those communities are sending one of their sons to go die in a war so that you can remain free. And that's a big deal. And the South never gets credit for that. Instead, the South gets, it is something that is a nonstop propaganda campaign. And I got to be careful the way I say this because the media is so unbelievably dishonest. It's unbelievable. And there's kind of this thing where like people from the South are now afraid to be proud of the South. That's a real thing. We're like, oh, it's white supremacy. It's like, no, it's not. It's garbage. Like, be proud of where you're from. Everyone should be. You be honest about what happened where you're from, obviously. I'm not trying to say you should forget it or erase it. But this part of the country in World War II, yeah, there was a disproportionate amount of people running into voluntary service to go storm Normandy Beach. That's a big deal. This part of the country that rose in record numbers after 9/11, disproportionate service. And I could go on and on and on. But there is this intentional campaign to have people from the South, and I mean all people of all backgrounds and all different races, to all of a sudden kind of submit to an Eastern metropolitan political agenda. To be like, okay, you're right, you know, this part of the world, we're awful, we're terrible, we're bigoted, even though no one in this room was even remotely even close to being alive when the injustices they're expressing happened. Is that you are many generations removed from that. Many of you, and some of you didn't even, some of you have parents that moved down here from other parts of the region. Now, why is it important that I'm saying this? Is that there is a regional conflict happening in our country right now. And the regional conflict comes from San Francisco and Manhattan and Chicago and Portland and Seattle and Boston and Washington, D.C. And this part of the country, they are trying to get to conform, and they want to have everyone kind of go on this nonstop apology tour for things you didn't do, for people that you might not even be related to. And so, and yet they, in San Francisco, they're the ones that are like anti-racist, or the ones in Portland or in Western Washington, and they have black-only dormitories. Last I checked, University of Alabama doesn't have black-only dormitories. In fact, if they did, it would be racist. And so you think to yourself like, oh, that's kind of weird. Which is the one that's actually implementing Jim Crow 2.0? Is it the fine people in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, or the bigots at Columbia University that have black-only graduation ceremonies? That's funny. Who's the one that's actually talking about race all the time? And so I always feel compelled to talk about this whenever I visit in the South. And I say this again as someone who didn't grow up here. You can obviously tell by, you know, my accent. I don't think I have an accent. I think you guys have an accent. We can talk about that later. Okay. But anyway, that's just the way the world works, is you should be understanding and you should be proud of where you come from. You should know about it. You should know the history. You should know the context. You should know the nuance. Do not defend the indefensible. Obviously, some reporter is going to say something out of context. That would be outrageous. Instead, understand the whole arc of your region. The lack of that, all of a sudden, will deteriorate the beautiful things of the South. How about the Christian-centered culture of the South? The family-centered culture of the South? How about the grittiness, the ruggedness, the connectivity, the community? These are things that are totally lacking in other parts of the country, that the South is excelling at. The South does that better than anywhere else. You call it Southern hospitality is kind of like a joke, right? That's a big deal. It is. You go to San Francisco, no such thing. And you're like, well, and you're like, I mean, I might have like San Francisco hospitality. I've never heard of that before, okay? Heard of like San Francisco defecation, but like, if that's their version of hospitality, then like, I don't know. But yeah, I guess I don't have to dwell on this too much. You guys can feel free to disagree. Don't hate yourself. That's the bottom line. It's a bad existence. Don't allow people to hate things about yourself you have not done. Now, if you participated in this and you're like an awful, terrible, evil racist, then I got a whole different speech for you, and you got to go find Jesus Christ, and you got a lot of people to forgive. You know, a lot of people that you have to ask forgiveness for, right? A lot. But if you are a 20-year-old who lives in Alabama and you're from Huntsville, and you've been told now from every single person that you have to go on this nonstop life cycle of just destroying and abolishing everything that came before you, that's awful. It's terrible, and it's not the right way to live. Okay, let me talk about fraternities. So, which is kind of connected, right? I'm told fraternities and sororities are a big deal here, which, by the way, I know they're a big deal because I just drove by these mega palaces that call themselves fraternities and sororities. My goodness, I mean, it would make the ancient Greeks, you know, stop and shock. You know, Aristotle, Socrates, Plato, like, wow, that's really impressive. So, yes. Front page of the Washington Post. Anyone ever see this article in the last week? Because it's coming here to Alabama soon. It's time to abolish college fraternities. This is the front page of the Washington Post, right? I'm going to read directly from it. If you associate fraternities with sexual assault and harassment, you're not stereotyping, you're paying attention. A 2019 report sums it up. Research on fraternity men has continuously found that they are much more likely to commit sexual violence than men not in fraternities. More than 3 times as likely, even though, as one study showed, their prior history. So what's responsible for the increase? According to the report, quote, it appeared to be fraternity culture itself. As with mass shootings or deaths of black Americans in the hands of police, and the public gets outraged. And when I read this, I said, okay, that's your data point, the thing that's so easy to debunk, of 30 unarmed black Americans in the course of 2 years were killed by police officers, many of whom were grabbing for the gun or trying to run them over with their car. Anyway, we could talk about that at a different time. They say, it continues by saying, but unlike with gun violence and racist policing, yeah, totally unbiased author, right? A single determined institution can abolish the problem. Without fraternities, the Washington Post says, life is much better. Quote, women can go wherever they want to go. It's the Washington Post. It's deep. It's profound. No, this is a real story. You can look it up yourself. Washington Post. It's time to abolish college fraternities. Now, That definitely got the crowd worked up for good reason. Why do they hate fraternities and sororities? Oh, I'm really going to make headlines with this one. I can't wait. Well, first of all, they last, and they were there. They've been around for a while. They don't like anything that is old. Things that are old deserve pause, and you should study them and understand why they've lasted. Having things to last is hard. It's very hard to make things last. It's easy to tear things down. It takes no skill to go tear down a statue. Zero. It takes skill to live a life worthy of putting up a new statue. That's a big deal. And instead of trying to have people stop and pause with wisdom and say, what good could come out of fraternities? Such as friendships for a lifetime, trying to create better men, social circles, all these different things. Not to mention, fraternities tend to be the most patriotic, conservative communities on campuses. That's the real reason they want to get rid of them, by the way. And it's part of this entire agenda of a war on men. We know that, obviously. The emasculation of the American male. And this recent op-ed in the Washington Post is like, I know, if any of you wrote the way that these authors write in the Washington Post, I would think that your professors would fail you out. Instead, it's, without fraternities, life is much better. Women can go wherever they want. Imagine that. It's like you write like this. It's as if someone would write on Tumblr. I don't know if people write on Tumblr or not, but like it doesn't even make sense. But it kind of goes to this question of, and it's going to come here eventually. I don't think it's going to have much success at University of Alabama, right? But the point is this, is that you have to understand that there is an all-out assault on things that have lasted, right? And it started with monuments, and now you have op-eds that are saying get rid of fraternities and sororities. Not yet sororities, just fraternities, right? But I'm sure sororities are part of it, which is they also don't like how autonomous fraternities are. This is another thing. They don't like that they're able to operate and exist outside of the university structure, right? They don't like that they have their own elections, that they have their own leadership structure. A lot of time they're able to raise their own money, and they also have their own accountability structure. And here's what bothers me about this story. It's as if the only people that do bad things are from fraternities. That's complete and total nonsense. We know that's not true, right? The question is, what has the Greek system done for the country? The answer is a lot. The answer is that some of the top innovators, leaders, risk takers, entrepreneurs have come out of the American Greek system. Is that it's created phenomenal leaders. And I will tell you this, that schools that have gotten rid of their Greek system, they become miserable places. They do. Schools that have totally abolished their fraternities or sororities, mainly Ivy League schools that have kicked them off campus, all of a sudden you start to have, especially fraternities, men that become even further directionless. Fraternities, for some men, give them purpose, give them direction, and give them accountability at a stage in life where they need it the most. They hate that. They would rather have them go to some college administrator to some sort of, I don't know, diversity, equity, inclusion seminar to go find purpose and meaning. No, instead it's like, no, you're going to show up at the fraternity, have a job to do. Like, here's the hierarchy. You're going to have to wait a couple years to climb up that ladder. If you do your job, then you will be rewarded. That's called a meritocracy. That's how life works. And I could tell you that there is a significant difference in the private sector of people that were heavily involved in their fraternity and people who were not. I'm not saying they're better. I'm not saying that there's some sort of like, this is an exact rule, but I say the same for sororities as well. And not to mention, it also solves one of the key problems on college campuses, like how do you meet people, right? Well, that's probably pretty important. But the final thing I'll say on this, which is super important because it ties all together, is it instills values that the left hates: community, unity, brotherhood, and responsibility. Is they hate those things. And instead, they want to have what? Division and discord, right? They actually do not want to have people come together and be able to, especially at a young age, coexist in a rather profound and powerful way. Okay, let me close with this, then we'll do some questions. I encourage every single young person here to understand that as you graduate college and as you're involved in all these things, it's going to be up to our generation to turn this thing around. Now, it's very important, do not boomer bash, okay? Don't bash boomers and say, why did you guys give us such an awful state of affairs? But people say, Charlie, what does success look like for the conservative movement? It needs to be easier for every young person in this room to get married and have kids. It needs to be easier. It is really expensive and hard for young people to get married and have kids in America. And so we need to develop a policy portfolio where it doesn't take, for example, it used to take 36 weeks of work a year. I never get this right. 36 weeks of work a year in the 1980s to be able to support a family of 4. Now it takes 53 weeks of work a year to support a family of 4. Where 53 weeks, meaning it's more than 1 year. You have to go into debt to support the family, right? And so it would require then the other spouse to go into the workforce, or it would require the family to go into debt. So what does that mean? It should be optional for the other spouse to go into the workforce. We need to create a set of affairs where it's easier to have big families in America. Right now, it's increasingly difficult. When some of you graduate, you're going to be entering an economy that is going to be a high preference on renting, not owning property. America becomes a less safe and more dangerous and, I would say, unfree country when people rent property and they don't own property. This is the least married generation in American history, millennials, not Gen Z. It is the most miserable generation in American history as far as mental health, suicide, and all of that. And you ask yourself the question, what are we going to do about it? Are we just supposed to say, just kind of sit on the sidelines? No, I think we actually need to start to recommit ourselves to things that give people purpose and meaning, like marriage and having children. Those are things that young people should always be told. This is an ideal that you should run to. This is where a lot of the people, kind of scream me off campus, which is that, and again, I'm not going to tell anyone how to live their life. I really don't care. But I will say this, that you will be a happier person the earlier you get married and the earlier you commit yourself to one person. That you will be a happier person. I can say it from experience. I got married in May, and it's amazing. And I could go into dating advice and all that. People ask me that all the time. Not exactly. We did that in Clemson. It was a mixed bag, to be perfectly honest. So very simple. Men, get your act together. Seriously, become someone that women want to date. Okay. And so the young ladies always they're like, yeah. So right there, yeah. The number of people say, Charlie, what do you, again, young women can comment in the question portion if they agree or disagree. The number one thing that I believe that young men need to understand is that self-control is far more important than self-esteem. Is that if you are not able to control yourself, if you are not able to go 3 months without having a drink, if you are not able to show other young women that you can't control your natural impulses, then why on earth would they want to be with you? And this is a huge problem, is that a man that is able to control himself is a very desirable and rare thing in American society. And I could see by every young lady nodding their head right now, I have just hit a 10 out of 10. And young men are like, well, what does that mean? Go find something difficult and go do it and forsake the easy. That's what you do. Maybe you got to wake up at 6 a.m. for a month straight. Try it. It's hard. Maybe you got to go a whole quarter without taking a drink of alcohol. It'll be rewarding. Maybe, and some people, they laugh. They say, oh, wow, I don't know if I could ever do that. You all of a sudden want to become someone that's different, someone that has purpose, not just meandering. Sometimes it's going to take sacrifice because things that are wonderful in life usually take a lot of work. Things that matter don't just come by scrolling through an Instagram feed or filling out an Amazon kind of delivery box. It takes the betterment of the soul. It takes an aim and dedicating oneself to it. Now, for young ladies, I got nothing for you. My wife can give you all the dating advice in the world, but for your young men, I got nothing but harsh teachings for all of you. But you know what? That's what you want to hear, because young men want to be challenged. Because young men are not being challenged. They're not being treated by men. They're being treated by like these metrosexual creatures of the American college academic. No, it's true. You have to be said, get your act together. Stop acting like a bum. Do something hard. Wake up earlier. You're better than that. That's how men need to be communicated to, especially in an increasingly fatherless society. Okay, so now that I have offended half of the population of University of Alabama, let's do some questions. But I just want to say, I love this part of the world. You guys are amazing, and I love University of Alabama. I've been here a couple times. I think this is my third time coming to University of Alabama. Actually, the first time speaking to students. I came to a football game here once, and it was a lot of fun. And then I think I spoke at a Republican dinner here once or something on campus a couple years ago. But anyway, really glad to be back. You guys are phenomenal, and I want to talk about how our generation can take more of a leadership mantle. And we have about 45 minutes for questions, which is a lot of time. So can you raise your hand, please? And let's just form a line there for some questions. Students get preference as always, and students that disagree get extra preference. Now, let me say this. 2 things. Shameless plug, if you guys are not yet subscribed to my podcast, please do that. You guys can hear all this back. And let me say this before we get to the first question. Wow! Enthusiastic flooding of questions. All right. Everybody, let me say this. All right. Before we get started, that is a lot of interest for questions. All right, before we get started, this is a mostly conservative audience. If someone who's on the left or a liberal comes and asks a question, do not interrupt them, do not heckle them, do not mock them, do not ridicule them. Give them the respect they never give us. Okay? Let's do the first question.
Hi, Mr. Charlie. My name is Caroline Smith. It's so nice to have you here. I actually met you backstage at YWLS when I was going to meet Laura. But the question I have for you is, how do we preserve election integrity moving forward?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. So I think last night shows that our focus on election integrity has actually bear some fruit, which is that focusing on fair and free elections, I think actually made the other side less likely to cut corners and engage in shenanigans and tomfoolery and all that sort of stuff. But also, I want to make sure, because I get this question a lot, Charlie, what's the point of voting, right? Edwin Durr is the point of voting, because that guy rejected cynicism. Right? And this is a very important balance, right? Which is you can be pro-reform minded. Don't ever say, oh, what's the point? You know, look in Virginia. Youngkin won the governor's race because people showed up and they believed in the system, right? Now, with that being said, we need voter ID. We have to get rid of this entire mail-in ballot nonsense that has been plaguing our country. We have to restore strict signature verification thresholds. And is it Edward or Edwin? Where's Connor? Is it Edward? Are you sure? All right, Edward Durr. And so if we do not have faith in our elections, then people are not going to have faith in their leaders. But here's the thing: is that the more we talked about it, I think we spooked the other side from doing what they did previously last night. So I think the emphasis on the issue actually has helped in and of itself. So thanks for being here tonight. Super glad you were at YWLS. Thank you.
How you doing? I'm Adam. I go to the University of Alabama, and I'm from New York City. So I was just wondering, because they're like, you know, the athletes like Kyrie Irving, for example, they're not allowed to play because they're not vaccinated. So I was just wondering, how can we stand up to their tyranny about the vaccine and the forced vaccinations, and like how can we because a phone call won't do anything. So how can we stand up to the government of New York City, to the mayor, to the borough presidents? How can we do that in order to stop the forced vaccinations?
Yeah, it's not easy. I mean, I hope Eric Adams, the new mayor of New York City, who's hopefully going to be less radical, I hope he releases this order. And look, I don't know how smart he is, but honestly, Kyrie Irving is more courageous than most Senate conservatives that I know, truly. And I could say that. I mean, Kyrie Irving and Ice Cube are, no, I mean, but so I mean, this is a serious question. I want to ask all of you. Would you give up $9 million if it meant not taking the vaccine? Maybe you, yes, but some people would say, I'd take my chances.
100%.
Ice Cube, he literally walked away from $9 million for a movie in Hawaii because he did not want to take the vaccine. Kyrie Irving is walking away from what, 20 to 30 million just this year. And his entire career, right? And so, yeah, it's a pretty miraculous thing. And I just want to reiterate this, though, which is that you're not going to be able to take your country back without some form of sacrifice and without some form of cost. I don't have any great advice on how to navigate the New York City bureaucracy, but I can say this, that Kyrie Irving, he has really showed me that he cares more about principle than money. And I can't say that for most professional athletes. Most professional athletes, it's all about, signing a deal and just getting rich and getting paid. And so he deserves our support. He truly does. And I think we have to keep the pressure on. And honestly, he has my full respect.
Yes.
And so few athletes have been able to do what he's done. So thanks for being here tonight. Appreciate it.
Hello, my name is Jake Babbage. I'm going to preface this by saying that I'm more of a left-winger, but I do appreciate how open you and other right-wingers are to discussion, especially considering our similar upbringings growing up in the suburbs of Chicago. Oh, cool. With that being said...
Which suburb?
You know where, like, Orland Park is?
Yeah, I know where that is.
I'm just south of there, yep. Ever since the 2020 election, it seems that conservatives like to claim that there is election fraud after any time they lose an election, especially last night when many conservative influencers such as Laverne Spencer were claiming that there was voter fraud and they wanted to bring in the lawyers into New Jersey. However, in Virginia, where Youngkin won, there was no mention of voter fraud or any of that kind of stuff on either side. Is this going to be a trend to claim fraud anytime Republicans lose elections? And if so, would you ever provide the sufficient evidence that it exists?
That's a thoughtful question. First of all, I think there was fraud in Virginia. I just think that we had more people to show up so that we could compensate for the type of margins that would be there. Now, let me be very clear about kind of what I mean by that. First and foremost, mail-in balloting. If you look at the amount of mail-in ballots that were sent in the 2020 election and signature thresholds that were lowered, especially in the state of Georgia, right? So Georgia went from 248,000 mail-in ballots to 1.2 million mail-in ballots and dramatically relaxing its signature threshold standards. You cannot confidently say that Georgia had the infrastructure in place to be able to facilitate the election the same way they did in years prior. And the mail-in ballot issue is really the most important, in my personal opinion, because you do not know certainly who's filling out the ballot. You don't. And there are plenty of examples how ballots are sent to multiple homes. The way that elections were done when you and I grew up in Chicago is you had to go to a precinct, actually show up and vote and actually show that you're in the register and vote. You didn't have to show an ID when you and I grew up in Illinois, but that's a different issue. But I think one thing you and I can both agree on, though, and you say you're more of a left-winger, and thank you for being here tonight and for your articulate question, is that there is something profoundly wrong with Mark Zuckerberg spending $420 million and actually going into the administration of the elections itself, hiring ballot counters, hiring people within the actual precincts themselves. But to your point is, yeah, I think there were plenty of shenanigans last night in Virginia. To what extent, we may never know. Bob Beckel himself went on television back in 2014 and said, hey, just wait on Fairfax County. We used to hold back the ballots, so we know exactly how to find them. Now, he might have been kidding and joking, or we might have seen some sort of growing trend that with the heavy mail-in balloting, there is this kind of growing uncertainty and uneasiness. But I would just like to ask you just a quick question. Do you agree that there was something wrong with the fourth wealthiest man on the planet spending $420 million to change our voting laws?
Yeah, I definitely think some of that caliber shouldn't be like involved in something like that. So that's something where we could see common ground on.
I'm pleased to hear that. Thank you, man. Roll Tide. Thank you.
Hey, Mr. Kirk. I'm Christian Martin. I'm a lifelong resident here in Tuscaloosa. First off, I would like to preface the question by saying I really want to thank you and I heavily respect you for being a voice for Christ on the public stage. Now, I do disagree with you on many of the issues of today. I agree with you on some, but specifically, namely the vaccine. How is this vaccine and vaccine mandates for this vaccine constitutionally and human rights-wise different from, say, the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine in public schools? And what is the constitutional basis to go against this vaccine mandate in comparison to an MMR one, which has been supported by the Supreme Court in many cases?
Fair question. I can give you three differences. Okay, number one, this vaccine was rushed to market when MMR went through far more independent peer-reviewed trials, and this one was put into the market way quicker, and some would say in a rushed capacity. So let me ask you a question. Do you walk around ever worried that you're going to catch measles or mumps or rubella?
No, sir, I don't.
Yeah, because those vaccines work,
That's true. But
right? And so,
of course, with the COVID shot, I'm not too scared about getting COVID either, though.
right. So that's the second thing,
this is a
is that
constitutional
we have vaccinated people, as far as the eye can see, that are having what they're calling breakthrough cases, right? Whether it be the governor of Los Angeles, Eric Garcetti, who had a breakthrough case, whether it be 9 members of the New York Yankees team breakthrough case, every person here who has the MMR vaccine, we're like, okay, I'm confidently inoculated that I don't have to walk around in fear that I'm going to get measles, mumps, and rubella. Let me give you a third difference, though, and one that I think is going to hit a sweet spot with your opening remarks, which is that religious and medical exemptions are usually always granted to MMR vaccines. is that when a mom or a dad will show up to a school system in most states across the country, 37 of them, they have vaccine freedom laws that if you go with a religious intent or a medical intent, you can get an exemption. We have millions of people across the country right now that are being denied medical exemptions and religious exemptions for this current vaccine. Right? So those are three differences. And let me give you a fourth difference to the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine and the current Johnson & Johnson, AstraZeneca, Pfizer, BioNTech vaccine that we have on the market, which is the adverse event reporting system, right? So anyone here right now can go to VAERS.gov, VAERS.gov, Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System. I encourage you to go into the government's own publicly accessible website and go look at the adverse events to the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine, which there are people that get paralyzed from the waist down from it. There are people that sometimes get adverse events, but those are minuscule, like 1 in 1 million, versus the adverse events that happen to this current vaccine, where currently, according to VAERS, it shows over 17,000 deaths associated with the vaccine. Now, that might be low, that might be high, but that should be, hold on, time out. Anyone that goes to a government website and says that anything kills 17,000 people, that should be a reason to press pause and at least give people a chance to say, I don't want to take it. And the final thing is this, and I'll say a fifth thing, because you asked for a couple, I said 3, but now here's 5, is that, and maybe you would agree with this, do you think people that have already had COVID should be able to then say, I don't want to have the vaccine?
I think it would be a good idea for them to still get the vaccine, because studies have recently shown that it is at least marginally more effective than just natural immunity to it from getting COVID. I got COVID in September of last year. I still got the shot, and I feel confident that it'll, might as well just add a bit more of immunity. But on one, now 3 did answer it, but I was more looking for a constitutional law-based answer in terms of like states' rights, municipal rights.
So if we go back to the precedent of it, you're right, you did ask that, and I didn't mean to dodge it. In 1904, there was a Supreme Court decision called Jacobson v. Massachusetts that did allow states and bodies to come in, not physical bodies, but let's say governing bodies or community bodies, to come in and mandate the vaccine. It was Jacobson v. Massachusetts. Now, I find that Supreme Court decision to be highly questionable on a variety of levels. Now, that Supreme Court decision was used erroneously by Justice Louis Brandeis in the 1920s to sterilize 67,000 women who were deemed idiot women against their will. So just understand that is the precedent that they are using. Now, from a constitutional standpoint, some judges are agreeing with you. Some judges are saying that the law is there and the precedent is there. I'm encouraging every judge and every lawyer worth their salt, look at those 5 items I just mentioned. Now, let me just name what it says on VAERS.gov, VAERS. And you guys can make all your own decisions as you see fit. And you've come very thoughtful and, and you've thought about this, obviously, but I want you to think about this. According to VAERS.gov, there were 818,000 adverse events to this vaccine, 127,641 doctor visits, 83,412 hospitalizations, 92,000 urgent care visits, 26,199 people that have been disabled, 10,179 people with Bell's palsy, 10,304 from myocarditis, to 8,408 heart attacks, 2,631 miscarriages, and according to VAERS, 17,128. Now, some people don't believe VAERS. Some people think it's low, it's high. So let me do this. Raise your hand if you know anyone that had an adverse event to this vaccine. Raise your hand. Yeah. That smashes everything you've been told on television. That's the most powerful point of data that shows everything I just showed was right. Either everyone that just raised their hand is a walking automaton of confirmation bias, or the 300 people that just raised their hand are affirming that there's something different about this vaccine than MMR. And I'll give you a 6th reason, because you asked, which is this vaccine engages in mRNA-type vaccine technology, which the inventor of such technology is a man by the name of Dr. Robert Malone, who has come out and he has said this vaccine is not like any others. You should press pause, and I'd be very careful with it. But I want to thank you for your respectful question, and I hope I gave you something to think about. God bless you. Thank you.
How you doing, Mr. Kirk? My name's Noah Linehan. I'm currently a student here at Alabama. So I'm actually from just outside of Chicago as well. I grew up in Bolingbrook. One of the things that I noticed when I was in high school is we didn't have shop classes, wood shop, automotive shop classes. Do you think the lack of labor shortage that we have right now in this country is due to the fact that a lot of high schools around